Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luciana. I'm assistant professor of sociology. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Flavio Carvalhaes. Flavio is associate professor of sociology at the Federal University of Rio. He actually runs a center that is similar to CID, but without, doing research in the global south looks a bit different in terms of resources. So this is like true heroes, like training people in the stratification in conditions that sometimes are not so ideal, but we do it. It was where I was trained first as a sociologist, and we started a PhD and master's together, and now Flavio is coordinating the center. So it's very exciting to be here. And you're going to hear today, he's going to talk about some of his new work that uses new administrative data to talk about educational expansion in Brazil and inequalities and equalities of opportunity. Flavio has written about racial inequality in comparative perspective also, so if you have this interest, you can talk to him about it. How to actually code the race, which is a category that is so different in different places, and somehow have a harmonized data sets that is not just educational levels or occupation, like having to think more critically about this hard stuff, especially when you're trying to publish in the US. So that's it. It's my great pleasure. And I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Luciana, for the introduction. Sometimes I think I should wear an eye patch because I feel like a pirate doing research in the global south, and we need to literally pirate many things, but I will get into trouble if I talk about that, so I'll stop right now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Luciana. So there's a personal side for me that is important to be here. I admire the work of people from Michigan, from the past, from the present. And one of my mentors, he did his PhD studies here. His name is Nelson do Vale Silva. He brought all these methods and theories to Brazil to start a rigorous program to study inequality in Brazil. He was a pioneer. He was in Michigan, so in a way, I'm indebted to Michigan in a lot of ways, and it makes me very happy to be here. Luciana, thank you so much for connecting the dots to make this happen. Thank you all the people that talked to me, like Robert, Joe, Fabian, and the students that I'll talk soon. Thank you also Pablo that I'll talk soon as well, and thank Linda and Melissa for organizing in Unicode as well. So let me start talking about a very descriptive result from 2010 that shows the percentage of population aged more than 15 years old that concluded higher education. Brazil, even comparing Brazil to other countries, Brazil has a very low level of completion of the tertiary, of higher education, right? Compared to Colombia, like Brazil is 5, Mexico is 10, Colombia is 18, the US is 25%, was, right, in 2010, but it's kind of the time that I use in my work. And for many reasons, I think this number should go up. I think it's kind of obvious to tell that, to say this in a university. But for societal reasons, like sustainable development is reached by investments in science, in engineering, in sociology to conduct, policy evaluation, policy development. Talking about inequality is important too, right? And to have this kind of people, you have to have a system. So you can't outsource this. So I think it's really important for this number to go up. And also due to individual results, because we know that the experience of higher education is important in an individual level as well, like for civic participation, health outcomes, and mainly labor market participation. Brazil did invest in higher education. This is data from its enrollments from 2002 to 2016. I'll justify this time frame in a bit. And it basically doubled the number of people inside higher education in less than 20 years. But coming from a back, this is my eye, okay? And not like a glass. So this perspective, like user imagination should think about this line, or one line going through like an inequality perspective. I get very troubled when I see homogeneous and aggregate trends. I want to understand the heterogeneity and also ask questions about who is benefiting. Like one number, 75% of enrollments in Brazil are in the private sector, tuition paying private sector. So this is not homogeneous across different market players, right? And different stakeholders. Also, this is not appropriated homogeneously by social groups, like Black students, white students, rich students, poor students, and I don't know, people from the north, people from the south. So this is what I try to bring, and I try to show you today how I'm thinking about both the market of higher education, and this is basically something I've done because I was studying inequality of opportunity and no one was writing about higher education, so I needed to higher education supply. So I started to write the works that I wanted to read. So I did it myself with the data that I was able to find. And yeah, I'll try to show you that and try to convince you that this is worth doing. And I'm quite proud of the results, but there is a lot to do still. So yeah, let's talk about, so I'll do this. So let me acknowledge my co-authors here. So I'll present two papers. The first one is related to the supply of higher education and education expansion in Brazil. My co-authors are Marcelo Medeiros and Clarissa Tagliari, and we published this last year, this journal, the higher education policy is available already. And basically in this work, like reading about the interdisciplinary literature that focus on higher education and higher educational institutions from the organizational point of view, they are very focused on diversity. They use this concept, which I'll define in a little, in a minute. But we will argue that another concept that it's complementary, which is concentration, that I will also define, but I guess you know a little bit about this in the center, is also a way to understand what happened. And I think this work is very important for two contextual facts that other countries in the world are also living out right now. So in the Brazilian experience can illuminate the experience of other countries as well. One is the rise of for-profit higher education in the country. So a huge deregulation happened, and now this is the basic norm that students enter higher education in the country. So of the 75% of enrollments in Brazil, 50% are in for-profit higher education. And another reason is distance education. Like I can prove that I started doing this before COVID, but now this is the one of the main forms as well of how people are experiencing higher education, and I will show you from the supply side what happened. I'll start but I'll be completely honest here, because I know there are many students, and I wanted to share with you how this idea came up, and it was not reading. It was basically watching the news and reading the news. So these are pop personalities in Brazil. From the this is like a TV presenter. These are singers, and they are advertising higher education institutions. Some of these people didn't go to higher education at all, and none of them went to these institutions. These in magazines, websites, across billboards, and it's series side by side with advertisements like selling rice, selling telephones, selling all this kind of stuff. So I think this is not very common. It was not common as I was growing up at all. And I don't see that much here in other countries that I visit. So this brought my attention, and also reading about like the business sections of newspapers, I started to notice like a huge consolidation of this market, like one institution buying the other, these huge groups being formed, all operating in the stock exchange, selling basically higher education. So I was not very satisfied. Like I started to read about what was happening with higher education in Brazil, and there was some qualitative works that was paying attention to this, but I wanted like more like hard measurements. There were no available, despite a lot of data available to calculate them. So I picked the data and calculated it myself. So now a proper academic motivation. The way that the way that expansion is taught is very, we can argue that it's very simple. So like, this is a basic graph that is very common in studies of education stratification. So X is time, Y is the percentage enrolled in a given educational system in a given time, a period of time. And these are like two groups that appropriate differently. This expansion inequality is the gap between these groups. This is a very simple way of treating higher education and inequality. So if we want to understand inequality, we also need to understand expansion. And I think a better way to understand expansion is to look at policies, regulation, and other stuff, basically substitute like X and Z here to understand what happens in the site, and then we can move on to understand what is happening with inequality of opportunity. I hope that in the future, people will think about my work like that I contributed like in this more complex way to think about higher education in Brazil. So when I started to study what methods I would use, what concepts I would use, I bumped into this concept of ecology. It's not ecology, like the word diversity, like organizational diversity. People studying all these types of things make use of the concepts, like supply of energy. What else? I took notes. Energy efficiency, ecology, science and technology policy, and the interdisciplinary literature about higher education also did that. And I would translate the idea basically with these two images. So this is like a hypothetical situation, like just a time zero, so we can contrast to this situation here. So this, in these two slides, diversity grows because there are more symbols, more colors. And I will read a little bit here about what is within the concept of diversity that I think it's good. It's good to ground, and then I will contrast this with the concept of concentration. So the main thing that the concept of diversity tries to address is heterogeneity. So there are three components in this way of thinking and of calculating diversity. First component, variety. The number of categories into which the elements that make up the system are divided, which answers the question, how many kinds of things do we have? So how many types of colors? How many types of circles? The second is balance. The distribution of elements among categories associated with the question, how much of each type of thing do we have? The third is disparity, which refers to the manner and degree to which it's possible to distinguish elements that make up a system. This idea is related to the question, how different from each other are the types of things that we have. So in an educational system, we can substitute like this geometric figures by available data, like if the institution is for profit or not profit, like the types of fields of study, any variables that we find that is interesting. And there are indexes that we can calculate to describe one point in time and also like variation across time. I can talk about them later if you want. I started to become not very satisfied with this concept because this concept doesn't answer the question of if there is a resource circulating in this environment or in the system, how much each type of institution or symbol appropriates this resource. This is what I was more concerned with. And that's why, coming from a background of studying inequality, I saw that the methods that study income concentration could become interesting for me to bring to this study. So that's what I did. But I will contrast the concept of diversity with the concept of concentration now. So, which is I'm more interested in. So the level of concentration or dispersion of any type of resource can be reached by comparing how a certain set of units appropriates a certain amount of resources. The distribution will be considered equal if the resource is distributed in equal proportion among the number of units. If a certain unit, or it's said, has an overrepresentation in the appropriation of the resource, its distribution is classified as concentrated. This is a definition by Tony Atkinson, one of the most known scholars about concentration and inequality. So I illustrated here like one symbol, like the size of the symbol here now is the amount of the resource that is being appropriated. In this case, I studied the concentration of enrollments because I don't have other types of data. I don't know, we could study the concentration of any number of concentrations, parents, endowments, and so forth. And this is important in my opinion, because to bring this line of reasoning to Brazil, mainly because of strong deregulation of the higher education market. So after 1996, legislation was passed that allowed one institution to buy the other institutions, and without any types of limits. And also it authorized institutions to provide distance education, and also like in a very uncontrolled manner with very little attention to its quality. So distance education, you know, like the economy, the scale that it allows the institutions to have, changed completely the whole supply of higher education in Brazil. And I'll try to show you some numbers in a bit. So with these concepts and this context and background, I asked these research questions like, how did Brazilian higher education expand? How do different institutions take advantage of the expansion? Was higher expansion concentrated in a few institutions? And does a specific segment of the higher education system drive concentration? Right? The data source that I use is our higher education census that account for every single institution in enrollment in the country. It was an harmonization of public available 37 different files. And in the end, I analyzed like around 33,000 higher education institutions. And basically looking how enrollments are distributed across the institutions. And with only 4 variables, we can understand a lot of what happened. And we use sector if it's public or private, and mode of delivery if is distance education or regular regular education. And the methods we use come from the analysis of income concentration and mainly descriptive stuff. Also, we decompose indexes that like synthesize the distribution and also allow for the composition by source. And we use the file index. So I don't know, like I think that other members of the audience may benefit a little bit just of one basic exercise here. So I'll show some results that we take the higher education institutions, we organize them in ascendant order and divide them in 100 groups of equal size, right? Like percentiles. And then we calculate how many enrollments are appropriated in each of these tiny parts. And we also compare these across time. So my next result, I will compare like how much each these little parts of the segment of the percentiles, what was the percentage growth across 2 points in time, and also of the total expansion, how much each little tiny part appropriated of this result, right? The y-axis here is the result we would be analyzing. So this is a typical situation where a small fraction of group concentrates a lot of the resources. So this is the first result. It growth incidence. So each little part, how much it grew across the period. So some results I would like to highlight. First, growth occurred along the entire distribution, but was much higher in the largest institutions. It's an ascending order. So here are small institutions, here are big institutions. The shape of the incidence curve shows increasing rates of growth from the smallest institutions up to the 75% region. Then rates diminish substantially from that point to about 90%. And the top 10% has a completely different shape from the rest of the distribution. Second, the top 5% grew faster than any other part of the distribution. The top 1% grew more than 200%, which is more than 4 times the growth rate observed for other parts of the distribution, like this part here. This suggests
a clarification. Size is measured on what? Is students, money?
The size of the number of enrollments in the institution.
Okay. Before at the beginning of the period.
This is already comparing the beginning and the end.
Yeah, that the percentiles are computed over 2002.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we see that depending on the size of the institution, if it was like in among the biggest institutions, its growth rates comparing 2016 and 2002 were completely different. And now we can also look at the accumulated accumulated result. I know it's a lot of information, but with some concentration and focus, we can understand what's happening, because we can look only to the top 1% of institutions. So 1% of institutions appropriated 35% of the new enrollments in the system. And if we take the top 5% of institutions, it's 60% if we round. So 60% of growth occurred in only 5% of institutions, which is very concentrated. So now I take this, synthesize it in an index, the tile index, and I decompose the index by the sources that derive these results. And also a lot of information, but let's focus on only in the beginning of the trend and the end of the trend. So now it's an index and it's decomposed. So in the beginning, there was like in 2002, there was no distance education. So all market was concentrated, like 60% of concentration was related with private education, like regular education. In the end of the system, or in the end of the time period we evaluate, 77% is concentrated in a small set of institutions, right? Is more, and we when we decompose, we see that distance education is very important. Like is more than half of this term here. So there was a complete change in what happened across time, and the market was concentrated towards very few institutions. I will give you a number. 20 institutions concentrate like 40% of enrollments. And there is like the regulatory agency right now. They are deciding if they authorize some movement that if they do authorize like 3 huge conglomerates of for-profit institutions can come to control more than 50% of the market. Which I think it's huge because there is not a lot of information about how their students behave in the labor market, how much they learn, what are the dropout rates, and all these kind of outcomes that would be very helpful to understand like the impacts of the situations. Like we suspect that the quality of this education that people are getting, it's not very high, and also this type of oligopoly that is being formed, like we can come back to the concept of diversity because like they basically offer like 3 to 4 types of field of study for in majors that people can graduate. Like it's very concentrated in business, law, and teaching. No research involved at all, and it's not a very good like labor market for professors and etc. So it's the like employment contracts got worse with these big players because of course labor is a cost, right? So I would highlight like these are my main concerns about this. I think like this work is I'm not very comfortable speaking about supply in this kind of terms of like that. I'm a sociologist, like, and I was not very used to thinking about this, but no one is talking about this. I thought that I should. And I'm quite happy because one of these authors is now a regulator. Clarissa became a regulator after this work. And at least there's like, you know, like Don Quixote over there in the Ministry of Education fighting these big companies. I hope she's successful. And now, like, I still have some time and I'll try to be quick and to show you like, we can also think now like in a more traditional way and think like, okay, Flavio, what types of students go inside these institutions? You know, like, please tell me a little bit about that. I will tell you. Sorry about the rhetorical question. So let me skip this. So let me acknowledge my co-authors. This is work in progress, so forgive me if it's a bit confusing, but I wanted to present like new work and maybe you can give me like input in both projects, of course, but in this one as well. My co-authors are Carlos Costa Ribeiro, he was my supervisor and a mentor that I love to work with, and Adriano Senkevics works in the Statistics Bureau of the Ministry of Education, and also is becoming a huge partner and co-author across many projects, and I love working with them. Let me, let me talk. So this graph here shows something that like as students, as professors, we know, but like at least in my context, is not something that we have access to study in terms of data. This tells 2 things. The curves, the bell-shaped curves shows like here's educational performance. So as you move right, higher grades. That's the only thing you need to capture from the so the black distribution has higher grades than the green distribution. And these other lines here are the probability to transition to a situation. For instance, higher education. And the basically line of reason of some parts of the educational stratification debates is to see like the overlap of these 2 lines and project the probability of transitioning to higher education given educational performance. And you can see that there is a gap. So with the same level of performance, people don't behave equally for reasons we can discuss. People say it's rational choice, people say it's cultural capital. These debates don't interest me now. And my one new advance of the literature is to say that like when we compute this and decompose this, into one number with two components that it's basically like how much of inequality goes through grades, how much of inequality is not depending on grades or other types of controls. So these two terms, we lose heterogeneity across the performance scale. So with only these two numbers. So these two scholars, Fabrizio Bernardi and Loris Triventi, they are calling attention to incorporate methods that we can keep the performance scale in this heterogeneity. And I'll go back to this graph later when I talk about methods. One new development of this work is that we incorporate horizontal inequality. So at least the part of the literature that we know, only treats this, all the studies treat like a binary decision of continuing or not continuing across the educational system. And we are saying that we need to incorporate like the types of education that people get. Like if they don't get none at all, if they go to public schools, which are in Brazil are academically selective, as I will show, and the private institutions. And we incorporate that, and for our country, having access of data with educational performance and transitions of students, like any type of longitudinal data is a big deal. And we use this kind of data that we have access through administrative data of a study that is similar to not a study, a test, standardized test that is similar to the SAT, and we connect this study with the higher education census with individual IDs. I shouldn't say we, I should say Adriano, because the data can't leave the ministry. So we run everything with simulations and public available data, write the codes with him, and then he computes the results and get back to us, which can be or not be a similar situation. So you know that working with administrative data comes with many types of challenges, not only methodological, but also like security and other stuff. And I hope that we can overcome this in the future. And I think like these types of results can be a step towards that. So the main contextual information that I want to give you is that like one I already gave, which is the size of the private sector that completely dominates the higher education market in Brazil. And we also have a sector of public universities which are tuition free and theoretically more research oriented. I don't know about if that part is true, but I do know, like, at least in the common sense, we thought like everybody thinks that they are selected, but actually we don't know if they are selected because no one has calculated how selected they are, but supposedly they are selected. And I'll show you that they are. But we have data only so this is the basic information. We aren't able like to incorporate more heterogeneity. So we are moving. It's not so ambitious. Like we are moving from binary to three outcomes. But I hope in the future we can have better measurements. So we will study one cohort that took this test in 2012. And there's a window of observation that we follow them for 5 years, and we try to locate them inside the higher education institutions, and we code our dependent variable in these 3 states: no access to higher education or access in either public or private institutions. And we focus on income strata. Sorry, I got this wrong. We use like vintiles, like we 20% top, 20 bottom, 20 top. and educational performance, which we divide in deciles, and as controls age, sex, school sector, etc. We use like multinomial logic models and some post-estimation strategies that make the results more easy to interpret. And mainly we do this. So basically here it's, let me take something. I get excited. Here it's the performance in the test. Actually, we use deciles, and our basic intuition is that we want. So this is like rich students, this is poor students, and we want to be sensitive to how students, mainly in the bad part of the, not bad part, or in the low part of the educational performance, what are their probabilities? And like this graph here, it illustrates, for instance, that rich students with bad performance have high transitions, right? Which is common across many contexts. And we will compute basically this whole gap here, but also compute how each part of the whole gap is due to each decile of educational performance, and also simulate what would happen if everything stayed the same for the rich student, but they had the probabilities of the poor students. So we are basically like, we also simulate this red line that takes advantage of the rich students, and we recompute the gaps to understand that. So some basic descriptive results. I think this is very impressive. So this is the top 20, this is the bottom 20. The median of educational performance of the rich students is like, if we project here, is like it's the 95th percentile of the poor students. So there's a huge imbalance of educational performance by economic strata. And like, yeah, I could tell all the results, but this is conveys the message. And this is these are proportions of how different quintiles of income, their proportions across no access, public and private. And we can see that as we move from the poor to the rich, the proportion of students outside higher education dramatically drops, and dramatically rise in both private and public institutions. Here are the numbers for Brazil if you want to compare like a benchmark for the whole population. And these are the first results. So in these first results, these first results are this size, like the proportion of students in each performance decile, and vertically is the probability of transition to this state, okay? And then later I will synthesize this in a gap and do all the kinds of calculations with the formulas that I presented before. So let's begin with the panel for those that not entered higher education. The impact of low performance is crucial. If we compare the location of the bubbles, like vertically, we can see that the poor students are always above the rich, and I'm taking only the two quintiles. This happens with all other comparisons as well. Comparing the bubble sizes, we also see the poor students overrepresented in low levels of academic performance, which is a strong sign of cumulative disadvantage. If we look at the transition to the public school, the result of academic selectivity arrives, like we see that only students in the top part of the performance distribution have high probability of entering, which was intuitive for Brazilians, but not demonstrated. So we can see strong association between the probability of entry and performance for both quintiles, and even like the given performance, poor students are even a little bit higher than rich students. But we also need to pay attention to the bubble sizes. The poor students are underrepresented in the high parts of academic performance. This means that to reduce inequality between the income stratas, performance needs to be tackled. I'll go over that in a bit. And finally, for the private, we have a more mixed situation because we see some signs of how rich students with low performance have higher rates of transition, but poor students are overrepresented in as size in the low parts of the distribution. So in the private sector matter for both groups, and this is why the next step is important. So I want to have one number and decompose this number by some things to understand how dependent the result is of the things I'm talking about. So let's start with no excess. If we we can compute the numbers. Basically, this column here computes the probability and the size of the bubble into one number. We can sum it up to have like a total probability, and if we subtract these two numbers, we can see the advantage of or disadvantage of the group to be in this state. And we can see that the result is very dependent on the low performance deciles of poor students, both because of the higher probability of no-entry and because of the higher proportion of low-income students at these points in the distribution. And here is the total gap. And if we divide each this subtraction by the total gap, we can see that the composition is very important. I will move on to other results because my time is finishing. So this is for no excess. So I'll skip the simulation, okay? This is for the public. And for the public, we see that it's completely dependent on the high parts of the academic distribution. And again, we see a mixed result for the private. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I put wrong animations in the for the private. Maybe if I do this and yeah, it will be a mess. Yeah. For the private, we can. For the private, it's more like it depends on the part of the distribution. The total result is beneficial to the rich students. There's a gap that favors rich students. But if we come back to this graph here, we could and not do this exercise of seeing how important the combination of probability and size. We would say that rich students with poor grades compensate their poor grades with their economic position, but with these other types of calculations, we see that things are not that simple. So moving forward, I just want to mention what are my plans ahead. So this is work in progress, and we will incorporate the next papers we want to produce with these results are we want to incorporate more heterogeneity on the dependent variable side with choice, with discrete choice, this kind of econometric models, and also do some matching exercises between the quality of the student and the institution. And also with administrative data, we want to see how students that graduate from higher education in Brazil go in labor markets with linked data that follows them in their contracts in the labor markets. I wish I could discuss and tell more, but I'm out of time, and we can discuss over the Q&A. Yeah. Thank you.
You can run the Q&A yourself, or I'll ask the same question. It's really interesting. The first part, the descriptive part on just rapid this change was in higher education is really impressive, and how much concentration there was. Of course, at that point, we still don't know, is it good, is it bad? Of course, we could, at that point, we could still believe, great, Lula was very successful in expanding public education, but that's certainly not the story, although it's not quite clear even in that part, I guess. It seems to be driven, the expansion, by a few, right, lots of market consolidation, few private actors, and just showing that in the data, like who what these are those the one with the beautiful people with the ads, I think would be great to see. Is it also, and then so at that point, as I said, we don't know, so it's necessary to go to the institutional characteristics and eventually student characteristics. So I'm really glad that you're showing this work in progress. Is one implication of what you're showing also, as to me, I really appreciated how you did this largely sort of non-parametrically, and we were able to see especially the highest income decile, the really rich students have very different patterns, right? They seem to be fleeing from these private institutions as they're flooded with other students and are really increasingly going into the public sector. Is that the case? And then if so, I'm assuming then we should be seeing much larger inequality in the public sector now.
So regarding the first part, yeah, it's a great idea, like for in a presentation, like, because really I can really like point to like a small list of institutions and say like these are the players. The new a new work that I want to develop like has better data, and actually I can look at the actual conglomerates and really like point like I would guess like if I focus on only 20 conglomerates, I will understand like a lot of how the concentration happened. Regarding the second question, as we move from the academic distribution, students do go to the public sector, but after after the time of this court, the affirmative action started to play in the public sector, which is a counterbalance. So affirmative action mainly by income. Students from public, the policy uses the if the student came from a public school as a proxy for income, and then there are some quotas for per capita income and racial distribution according to the state that the student comes from. So I think it counterbalanced, but there is a lot of inequality in the public sector, especially like if we take into field of study. So like I don't have numbers now. So like in this period, if you wanted this very prestigious and more research-oriented fields of study, you needed the public schools because it was only being offered there. But now there are in parallel, there are, depending on the city, there are like this, I would say like I don't know if it's bad to say that, but I don't think it is. Like these boutique schools, like kind of little, that attract elites, but they don't like make a mark on the data, but they do exist. And actually like the richest part of Brazilians are moving, like the private sector noticed that, and now they are competing to get the students in medicine and other fields that didn't exist like maybe 15 to 20 years ago.
Good. Okay, so thanks, Flavio. So I want to make some comments because I think it's for us to think about the relevance of what you're saying also for the US context. So I know that some American universities now are moving to get rid of SAT, for example. Columbia University, where I did my PhD, is one of them. Like, we should get rid of SATs as a way to diminish inequality. Most education scholars that I know are coming and they're saying, well, actually, you probably will increase inequality because test performance is still something that, you know, a poor kid could go well in and not this all extracurricular activities. In Brazil, we have something that it's interesting, and there's an Argentinian in the room, where we actually have public universities that are totally free. It's not like this public university. It's like free, and it's where Flavio was being shy because he's a professor, but it's there. But it's where all the best. It's where you want to teach. So, and the irony is that the people that are from middle class like me, I went to a public university, and people that are from lower classes, first generations, they're really entering the system through the private sector. The question then becomes, so in Brazil, it's just performance to get into college. There's no application. There's a test that you do 1 day a year. You better be feeling well that day. Otherwise, it's like, this thing that Flavio was showing is like the day of your life, and you got a score. And rich students get in because they do well in this performance. It's not their extracurricular activities. It's just like, this is how class is reproduced.
Yeah.
To this. Once you have affirmative action, so 50% of the people coming to the public university in Brazil come from public schools. You are creating more inequality inside the educational system, but it's a good type of inequality because but then there is like more, and affirmative action in Brazil is class-based and racial-based, so diversifying the system too. But I think what Flavio is showing is that you're diversifying the system in a way that not necessarily translate into labor market outcomes, because I know from your other research that actually it's increasing inequality in certain labor market outcomes. So could you talk a little bit about that? Like how actually, we know from education expansion, whenever you expand education in any context, you increase inequality at that level. But in terms of translation to the labor market in a place where people don't have access to jobs, like I think 60% of Brazilian jobs is Co-1 group, elementary occupation. So it's also a question like, Flavio argued this is good, but the matching of how the labor market works, who are we incorporating? All these lawyers now, where are they gonna go to work? The beautiful picture of a pop star doesn't answer this type of question. So like, can you talk a little bit about how this increase in inequality, one, might be good at the educational level, but then how do we deal with that at the job market side? Because I think that might be relevant to what is happening in the US now.
Okay, I'll start with the former. So this huge expansion, like a huge part of it went in parallel with economic development, like mainly between 2002 and 2016, but coming from like maybe 2 decades of stagnation. So our labor market characteristics didn't change that much to incorporate these new types of workers. And so like, I would say like that it's really necessary to understand the heterogeneity by field of study, for instance, because some like the results go all over the place, but so let's say like doctors weren't a factor by that because of all the like opportunity hoarding, rent, like this kind of licensing, this kind of stuff. But I don't know, engineers didn't fare well because basically when there's stagnation, they don't have any place to work. So like they go to other less qualified things. So I think that like actually it's our joint work, right, that shows that this really did happen, in that the labor market has a lot of difficulty absorbing all these people. And I think that we would need like better planning incentives, and mainly in the private side as well, because like if like 3/4 of your workers come from there, and like they decide everything and have no direction of of anything or no incentive to only to capture new students and new fees, things will probably stay the same, not change much. The other part of your question, I'm sorry, I didn't get, like you were saying that there is good inequality within the public sector.
Yeah, also in the private sector, if you're bringing people that have different socioeconomic backgrounds to the university.
Through affirmative action. But what's the question?
Like, how do we think about that in terms of
How do we, okay.
educational expansion? Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know, in the US, is community college is the main driver of access to education or no? But it is.
so yeah, I don't know how to answer that. So how, but I don't know actually if I agree with this statement that there's more inequality. Like affirmative action, I think that brought like both affirmative action and other policies. Let me clarify a little bit another context here, because there was affirmative action and this huge private sector growth also happened with a lot of subsidies. Either like direct subsidies or subsidized loans. So I think that the inequality, I would say that many studies show that if we compare 2 points in time, like even like mostly if you go to the 90s and now, the public sector has more. I wouldn't say like diverse. I would say like it's less equal. Less unequal, because all if you go to the selective fields of study, their intake changed completely. Like there were no poor doctors, no black doctors. Like, and I'm not exaggerating almost. Like there were very few, and now there are. I think this is a sign that actually inequality fell, but we would need to like I think another message that I've been preaching is that we need to go beyond this type of stuff. Like one thing that I think is very important is to look at experiences inside higher education. So like very important stuff like dropout rates and completion rates, because people get very comfortable saying like, oh, we put all these poor students here, but are they experiencing the same? Like even in a school with quality, we know that the experiences are very different, or experiences get interrupted, right? And so I think that the debate needs to move forward other types of issues and also other types of evidence. And I hope that I can help a little bit in the future towards the direction. I would like the labor market part. I think it's super important.
I have a question about like the private institutions in Brazil. Are they mostly like replicating the public sector, or are they kind of offering something that's different? So you said there's like a lot of them are kind of business, law, and medicine. Are you getting the same types of degrees and like having similar experiences between the two institutions, or is it like a different kind of source type of supply?
It's different, both in terms of diversity, in the sense that I talked when I was talking about the geometric shapes. Like the composition that like of field of study, it's very different. Like, and I said like distance education grew a lot, but like the ones that don't go to distance education go to evening courses, right? So it's super, like more than half of those that are in. So like we see in Brazil, there is not an experience from school to work. It's from work to school, because like the way that education is experienced by a large part of the students is not linear at all. And mainly in the private institutions, they cater to this profile of students. And that's why distance education is so attractive, because like these are workers. Our cities are huge with bad transportation. So if the person can go to, like, I don't know, I see people watching classes in their phones in the subway. I'm not, you know, like in other types of things, it's expensive as well. You need to buy a bus ticket, eat, and of course, it's like everyone that every type of time sharing in our lives takes a big toll on us, right? So like study and work is not easy, and we like. I like to sleep a little bit, you know, like in if sleep becomes an issue, life gets tough. And we can also think about, like, I think it's important to train these people, but also like what type of worker, like we like for this context, we can't bring American or European ways of thinking to think about a complete different situation and experience. So we need to take all these things into consideration. Yeah. So I would say it's very difficult because the selective academic part, like evening courses are more common now, but are still rare. There's almost no distance education in the public sector. And the assumption is that the student is a full-time student. So it's very difficult.
Last question.
I guess, yeah, I was sort of interested in learning on the distance education point and whether you see what sort of breakdowns by the test score and income and things are you seeing in terms of who's going to distance versus regular education?
Yeah. So this distance education, it's kind of the intuitive part, like students in the lower ends of the distribution, poorer, and it's an interesting trade-off to think about because, like, given the spatial heterogeneity in Brazil, like distance education is very important because there are parts of the country that you simply can't reach, right? But I think it's an exaggeration to move, like, I don't know, more than one half of your students towards that type of experience. So yeah, but it's like that, and like distance education have a lot of trouble with like the experience of the students, like the dropout rate is super high, and the one important thing, the average age of the students is super high, like more than 30 years.
Okay, thank you so much.